What happens when two of the most outspoken personalities in media clash live on television, with no script and no safety net? What you're about to hear is the explosive exchange that had viewers glued to their screens, phones buzzing with notifications, and social media erupting in real time. This is the story of how a routine interview spiraled completely out of control, ending with one of the most dramatic exits in television history. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story has layers that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about live television. The studio lights were blazing hot that evening, casting sharp shadows across the familiar set. Piers Morgan sat behind his desk, papers neatly arranged, his signature confident smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He had conducted thousands of interviews, faced down politicians, celebrities, and controversial figures without breaking a sweat. Tonight felt different, though. There was an electric tension in the air that even the seasoned production crew could sense. Meghan Markle entered the studio with her usual poise, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. She wore a navy blue blazer that commanded attention, her hair pulled back in a sleek style that framed her determined expression. As she settled into the guest chair, she crossed her legs deliberately and fixed Piers with a steady gaze that suggested she was ready for whatever he might throw at her. Well, Piers began, his voice carrying that familiar mix of charm and challenge that his viewers had come to expect. Here we are again, Meghan. I have to say, it takes some courage to sit in that chair after everything that's happened. Meghan tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at her lips. Courage, Piers. Or perhaps it's just confidence in the truth, something I notice you seem to struggle with during our previous encounters. The audience stirred at her directness. This wasn't going to be a typical softball interview, and everyone in the room could feel it. Piers leaned back in his chair, his eyebrows raising in mock surprise. Oh, so we're starting with the gloves off tonight, are we? How refreshing. Tell me, Meghan, do you ever wonder why every interview you give seems to contradict the last one? It's almost like watching a masterclass in selective memory. Rich, coming from someone who built a career on selective editing, Meghan shot back without missing a beat. But I suppose when ratings are more important than reporting, accuracy becomes negotiable, doesn't it? The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators adjusted their positions, sensing that this exchange was going somewhere explosive. Piers's smile widened, but there was something sharper behind his eyes now. Selective editing. My dear Meghan, we broadcast live. There's no editing here, just raw, unfiltered conversation. Something I'm not sure you're comfortable with, given how carefully orchestrated your usual appearances tend to be. Orchestrated, Meghan's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm surface. Is that what you call preparation? I suppose when you're used to ambushing people with gotcha questions, someone who comes prepared might seem orchestrated to you. Ambushing. I prefer to call it journalism. You know, asking the hard questions that others are afraid to ask. Speaking of which, let's talk about your relationship with the truth, shall we? The studio fell silent, except for the low hum of equipment. Meghan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle straightening that suggested she was gathering herself for what was coming. My relationship with the truth, Piers. That's fascinating coming from someone who has publicly admitted to hacking phones for stories. But please, do enlighten us about your expertise on truthfulness. A collective intake of breath swept through the studio audience. Piers's confident facade flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself, but that brief crack hadn't gone unnoticed by anyone watching. That's quite a deflection, Meghan. We're not here to discuss ancient history. We're here to discuss your very recent claims about your time in the royal family. Claims that seem to shift depending on which interviewer you're speaking to. Ancient history, Meghan laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Phone hacking is ancient history, but my personal experiences are somehow fair game for endless speculation. That's an interesting moral compass you're working with there. Your personal experiences become public interest when you choose to monetize them on international television, Piers countered, his voice gaining intensity. You can't have it both ways, Meghan. You can't court the media when it suits you and then cry victim when the questions get uncomfortable. Monetize them. You mean speaking my truth about experiences that nearly destroyed my mental health? I'm sorry, Piers, but not everything is about profit margins and clickbait headlines. Some of us actually care about using our platform responsibly. The exchange was heating up rapidly, each response more pointed than the last. The production team exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. This was exactly the kind of television that generated headlines, but it was also veering into dangerous territory. Responsibly, Piers's voice dripped with skepticism. Is it responsible to make explosive allegations without providing concrete evidence? Is it responsible to damage the reputation of an institution that millions of people hold dear, based on your interpretation of conversations and interactions? Meghan's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Evidence, Piers. What kind of evidence would satisfy you? Hidden recordings of private conversations, screenshots of text messages, because that seems to be more your style than mine. The reference to phone hacking again wasn't lost on anyone. Piers shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his usual smooth confidence beginning to show cracks. The tables were turning in a way he clearly hadn't anticipated. We're not talking about journalistic methods, we're talking about accountability. When you make claims that affect real people, real institutions, don't you think there should be some burden of proof? Real people? Meghan's voice rose slightly, the first sign that her composure might be slipping. What about the real person? Sitting in your studio right now, what about my mental health, my well-being, my family's safety? Or do we not count as real people in your worldview? The studio was electric now, the tension so thick it was almost visible. Both participants were leaning forward slightly, neither willing to back down from this escalating confrontation. Of course, you count as real people, Piers replied, but his tone suggested otherwise. But when you thrust yourself into the spotlight, when you choose to air your grievances on platforms watched by millions, you open yourself up to scrutiny. That's how this works, Meghan. You don't get to control the narrative. Control the narrative? Meghan's laugh was sharper now, more bitter. You mean like how you controlled the narrative when you stormed off your own show because someone dared to challenge your opinion? That kind of narrative control. The audience murmured at the reference to Piers's dramatic exit from his morning show. It was a low blow, and everyone knew it. Piers's jaw tightened visibly, his professional mask slipping. Another degree. That was a matter of principle, something you might understand if you had any consistent ones. I wasn't going to sit there and be lectured about opinions I'm entitled to hold. Opinions about my mental health, you mean? Opinions about whether my experiences were real or imagined. How very principled of you to publicly doubt someone's suicidal thoughts. I'm sure your viewers really appreciated that moral leadership. The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down between dueling opponents. The studio was deadly quiet now, everyone waiting to see how Piers would respond to such a direct confrontation about one of the most controversial moments of his career. I questioned inconsistencies in your story, not your mental health, Piers said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. It's called journalism, though I understand that might be a foreign concept to someone more used to friendly chat show appearances. Journalism, Meghan leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Is that what you call it when you spend months obsessing over my every move, analyzing my body language, dissecting my clothing choices? Because that sounds more like stalking to me. I comment on public figures. It's literally my job. If you can't handle public commentary, perhaps you shouldn't have married into the most famous family in the world. There it is, Meghan said, sitting back with a knowing look, the real Piers Morgan. It always comes back to punishment, doesn't it? I should have known my place. I should have stayed quiet. I should have accepted whatever treatment came my way because I dared to marry. Above my station. That's not what I said, and you know it. Don't twist my words. I don't need to twist your words, Piers. They speak quite clearly on their own. You've made a career out of punishing women who don't behave the way you think they should. How many female celebrities have you gone after over the years? How many times have you questioned their truthfulness, their motives, their right to speak their own experiences? Piers was visibly struggling now, his usual quick wit seeming to desert him. This isn't about gender, this is about accountability, something you seem allergic to. Accountability. Let's talk about accountability, shall we? Meghan's voice was gaining momentum, like a prosecutor building to a closing argument. You've been caught in lies multiple times throughout your career. You've admitted to phone hacking. You've made demonstrably false claims about public figures. Where's your accountability, Piers? We're not here to discuss my career, we're here to discuss yours. Or what passes for a career these days. The dismissive tone was the wrong choice. Meghan's eyes flashed with genuine anger for the first time in the interview, and when she spoke, her voice cut through the studio like a blade. What passes for a career? You mean building a global platform to speak truth to power? You mean using my voice to advocate for women's rights, mental health awareness, and social justice? I'm sorry that doesn't measure up to your standards of screaming at celebrities on morning television. At least I don't pretend to be something I'm not, Piers shot back, his composure finally cracking. At least I don't play the victim while simultaneously cashing checks from the very system I claim to despise. There it is again, the victim narrative. Tell me, Piers, at what point does sharing your experiences stop being victimhood and start being survival? At what point does speaking out about institutional racism and mental health struggles become legitimate instead of playing victim? When you provide proof instead of just allegations, when you name names instead of making vague accusations, when you stop changing your story every time you sit for an interview. Name names. Meghan's voice rose incredulously. So you can destroy more lives, so you can turn private family conversations into front-page scandals. I've watched you operate, Piers. I know exactly what happens when people give you names. The exchange was becoming more heated by the moment, both participants now clearly operating on emotion rather than strategy. The professional veneer was completely gone, replaced by raw antagonism. If you're not willing to back up your claims with facts, then maybe you shouldn't make them in the first place, Piers pressed. Maybe you should have thought about that before going on international television and making explosive allegations. Facts. You want facts? Piers. Here's a fact for you. I have recordings of our conversations leading up to this interview. I have documentation of your producers promising this would be a fair discussion about my charitable work. But instead, you've spent the entire time attacking my character and questioning my integrity. The studio erupted in surprised murmurs. This was news to everyone, including apparently Piers, whose expression shifted from confidence to confusion. To something approaching panic? Recordings. What recordings? There are no recordings of private conversations, aren't there? Meghan smiled for the first time since the interview began, but it wasn't a warm smile. You of all people should understand the importance of documentation, given your history with communication ethics. Piers looked toward his producer off camera, clearly seeking guidance or reassurance that wasn't coming. The power dynamic in the studio had shifted dramatically, and everyone could feel it. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Would you like me to play them for your audience? I think they'd be very interested to hear what you really think about journalism ethics when you think the cameras aren't rolling. The threat hung in the air like a sword over Piers's head. His usual bravado was completely gone now, replaced by the look of someone who had walked into a trap they hadn't seen coming. The hunter had become the hunted, and the transformation was as dramatic as it was complete. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Piers processed what had just happened. His eyes darted between Meghan and the cameras, clearly calculating his next move. When he finally spoke, his voice was noticeably less steady than it had been moments before. Even if such recordings existed, which I doubt, they would be inadmissible in any legitimate forum. Private conversations between journalists and their guests are protected by professional standards. Professional standards. Meghan's eyebrows arched in disbelief. The same professional standards that led to phone hacking scandals. The same standards that allow you to ambush guests with questions they weren't prepared for. Your definition of professional standards is quite flexible, isn't it? This is getting ridiculous, Piers said, attempting to regain control of the situation. You're making wild accusations without any basis in fact. This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes people question your credibility. My credibility? Meghan reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, placing it deliberately on the table between them. Shall we test that theory right now? I have 3 separate recordings from our pre-interview conversations. Would you like to hear the one where you called me a pathological liar? Or the one where you discussed how you planned to destroy my reputation on live television? The color drained from Piers's face. The studio was so quiet you could hear the electrical hum of the equipment. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, frozen by the drama unfolding before them. You wouldn't dare, he whispered, but there was no conviction behind the words. Wouldn't I? You've spent months questioning my courage, my integrity, my willingness to back up my words with action. Here's your chance to see exactly how far I'm willing to go when pushed into a corner." Meghan's finger hovered over her phone screen, and for a moment it seemed like she might actually follow through on her threat. The tension in the room was unbearable, everyone waiting to see who would blink first. "You're bluffing," Piers said again, but he was already starting to remove his microphone. "This whole thing is a setup. You came here tonight planning this ambush." An ambush. That's rich, coming from the king of gotcha journalism. But if that's how you want to characterize being held accountable for your own words, then yes, I suppose this is an ambush. I'm not going to sit here and be threatened by someone who clearly has no respect for professional boundaries, Piers said, standing abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the silent studio. Professional boundaries. You mean like respecting someone's mental health struggles? Like not stalking them with paparazzi? Like not turning their private family moments into tabloid fodder? Those kinds of professional boundaries. Piers was fully standing now, his microphone dangling from his hand. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of his obvious distress and growing anger. "This interview is over," he declared, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I will not be manipulated by someone who has made a career out of playing victim while attacking everyone around them." "And there it is," Meghan said, her voice calm and measured in stark contrast to his agitation. "When confronted with the consequences of your own actions, you run away. Just like you ran away from your morning show when challenged. It's quite a pattern, isn't it?" "I don't run away from anything," Piers snapped, but even as he said it, he was backing toward the edge of the set. "I simply refuse to participate in character assassination disguised as an interview." "Character assassination." I'm using your own words, Piers. If hearing them back makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should consider why that is. The studio. The audience was watching this unfold like spectators at a tennis match, their heads turning back and forth between the two combatants. The production team was in visible panic, unsure whether to cut the cameras or let this train wreck continue. "You know what, Meghan? You're right about one thing. I am leaving, but not because I'm running away. I'm leaving because I have better things to do than listen to the delusions of someone who has lost all connection with reality." Lost connection with reality. That's fascinating coming from someone who just spent 30 minutes denying documented conversations that I have recorded evidence of. But please don't let reality interfere with your dramatic exit. Piers was at the edge of the set now, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He pointed an accusatory finger at Meghan, his composure completely shattered. "This is exactly why no one believes you anymore. This vindictive, manipulative behavior. You came here tonight, not for an interview, but for revenge. Well, congratulations, you got it. Revenge." Meghan remained seated, her voice still eerily calm. "No, Piers, this isn't revenge, this is accountability. Something you've spent your entire career avoiding. But you're right about one thing. I did come here with a purpose tonight. I came to show people exactly who you really are when the cameras are rolling and you can't edit your way out of the truth. The truth, you wouldn't recognize the truth if it introduced itself personally. You've been lying for so long, I don't think you even know what's real anymore. And yet I'm the one with documentation, and you're the one running away from your own show. How interesting." That was the final straw. Piers Morgan, the man who had built a career on never backing down from a fight, who prided himself on his ability to handle any interview situation, completely lost control. "You know what? This show is over. Security, escort this woman out of my studio. I will not be held hostage by someone's revenge fantasy." But Meghan made no move to leave. Instead, she picked up her phone calmly and addressed the cameras directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed exactly what I've been trying to tell people for months. When certain people in media are confronted with their own behavior, when they're held accountable for their own words, they don't engage in good faith discussion. They attack, they deflect, and ultimately they run away." "Get her out of here," Piers shouted from off camera, his voice cracking with emotion. "Cut the cameras, cut everything." But the cameras kept rolling, capturing Meghan's final words as security finally approached the set. "I'll leave peacefully, as I always intended to. But I want everyone watching to remember this moment. Remember who remained calm and who lost control. Remember who brought evidence and who brought only accusations. And most importantly, remember who was willing to face the truth and who ran from it. As security helped her gather her things, Meghan looked directly into the camera one last time. The truth doesn't become less true just because it makes powerful people uncomfortable. And sometimes, the most revealing thing about a person isn't what they say, but how they react when their own words are played back to them. With that, she walked calmly off the set, leaving behind a studio in chaos and a host who had just experienced the most humiliating moment of his television career. The cameras finally cut to black, but the damage was already done. In the space of one explosive interview, the hunter had become the hunted, and the media landscape had just witnessed one of the most dramatic reversals of power in television history. So what did you think of this explosive confrontation? Was Meghan justified in her approach, or did she cross a line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines. Because sometimes the most interesting story isn't what happens on camera, but what happens when someone finally decides to fight back.